Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here with you. And hey, Doug, you're going to put a little light on the subject tonight, aren't you?
Yes, we're going to be talking about bioluminescence tonight.
Fascinating subject, you know.
We have an article that came from Answers in Genesis that it first started talking about mushrooms that glow in the dark, but then it went into a whole bunch of other type of creatures and insects and all kinds of different things that have this bioluminescent property.
Right, so before we go on, bioluminescence is like light from the organism itself, from living organism. It's bio, and it's light, and so it's like things that glow in the dark, basically. And mostly, this article started out with a lot of plants, mushrooms, things like that, but it goes through all kinds of creatures, animal as well as vegetable, if you will, or fungus, if you will. And I think that was kind of fascinating because there's a lot of things about bioluminescence. Well, the article itself was dealing with how little is really known as to why it even. You can't even get an evolutionary answer to it, Doug, right?
Let me grab a detail here, just so.
All right, why don't you do that? Let's do that.
It starts out with this Brazilian mushroom in a coconut forest, and these are bioluminescent mushrooms that give up a green glow. And what happens is that insects apparently get attracted to the green light.
Yeah, it said in the article virtually every insect, or it said all insects see green, can see the color green. I don't know how they know that, but that's kind of fascinating in its own right. But do continue. So go ahead with the mushroom thing here.
And so there's like 71 different varieties of mushrooms that have this luminescent property. And if you think about it, what we have is a real dilemma for evolution, because you have all these different diverse kinds of creatures all having this property of giving off light. And it's actually a kind of chemistry that there's a wide variety of ways that this light is produced. Yeah,
we're stuck with that old saw that the evolutionists always fall back on when you have the same thing happening with virtually no common reason or for their origin. In other words, like the wings, we've talked about the wings of insects, birds, reptiles, mammals, and yet the coding for it, there's nothing that relates to it. Well, in the bioluminescence, I'm seeing a corollary here, Doug, that it may be different the way it comes together, but the way these creatures, whether it's the plants or the jellyfish, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and other animals, they don't have any commonality as to how they do what they do. In other words, they kind of maybe have answers to what they do, but even they call it what, luciferins and luciferase and stuff, and some books.
Luciferase is name of some of the enzymes that are producing this. But this is something that I don't think the chemists can really reproduce in the lab.
Put names on it, but it doesn't mean you can make it.
That's right.
Yeah.
By the way, that's a typical tactic of scientists when they come up with something that they can't explain. Well, they give it a fancy name.
Yeah, and it says, okay, now we know something about it. No, you've just described something, but doesn't really. We know it glows, but we don't know why or how fully in a lot of these aspects. And what we don't really know, Doug, is why all these different various living organisms, from plant to animal, would evolve. Why would they evolve these kinds of things? You can make speculations. Well, is it for mating purposes? Is it for protection purposes? And some of those are actually useful for those reasons. But there's there's many diverse reasons for why they have the bioluminescences. There are causes for the bioluminescence.
Yeah, so if you think about it, let's take, for example, this typical fungus or this mushroom that grows on the tree. And the evolutionists would say, well, it has some sort of purpose that's attached to this characteristic of it being luminescent that it
Because it attracts insects that will.
As if it was trying to do that on its own because it's got some sort of mind behind it.
This is the thing that this always irritates me. Not irritates me, but they put like volition, consciousness to things like plants and animals, or if you will, the cellular. Like they're thinking, and they're almost begging the question, Doug. We do believe there is a consciousness behind a lot of this stuff because there's a designer, but it's not in the plant themselves. This is almost like a secular, or if you will, an atheistic form of pantheism.
Well,
where
it's
you put
a secular form of miracle.
Well, okay, there you go. But it's like
so you believe in a miracle here, and you don't have an explanation for it, and so what you're doing is trying to come up with a reason for why things are happening, but you're not hitting on a reason because that's counterintuitive to what your evolutionary scenario is like.
Wait, you almost it begs the question, Doug. They come up with they describe these at the cell or even genomic level or at the cellular level or molecular level like it's got conscious ability inherent in itself. It's the whole idea, Doug. Properties inherent in matter cause replication and increased complexity. That makes no sense if you really think about it. But to get rid of a God, you will do anything to get rid of the supernatural foot getting in the door. I understand that, but that's like burying your head in the sand when you have things like this coming out and facing you square in the face.
Yeah, here's a part of the article. It's saying, it's talking about calibrating the mushroom clock.
Okay.
And the scientists, they trained the laboratory-grown mushrooms to recognize night. And so the mushrooms cannot detect light, but the scientists found that within 2 days, the mushrooms had set their clocks by the nightly fall in temperature. The mushrooms cranked up their light output about 10 hours after dark. The pattern varied only slightly depending upon the temperature. Mushrooms' internal clocks, once set, intensified their light output about every 22 hours, even when kept in total darkness for several days. So mushrooms are able to actually tell time. They have a circadian rhythm.
They have a circadian rhythm, okay.
That causes these chemical reactions to generate their cool glow. Now it's interesting that this creating a chemical reaction that gives off cool light. It doesn't create heat, and that's sort of a difficult thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, isn't it those glow sticks they do? Haven't they basically figured out how to I don't know whether they can artificially synthesize these things, but that's what you do. You break the two things, they get together and they glow, and they're kind of a cool glowing thing now. But it was based on how many we've talked about that on shows in the past. How many times we've in science or in selling things we imitate things that are already reproduced in nature, like the Velcro, for instance, with the burrs and other things of that nature. This is one of those things too. They've been able to figure out this chemical, but they can't really figure out how to make it in the way they do it. But it is a cool light, very cool. And that is an interesting. There's a picture here Doug's got here, and they made an artificial mushroom, and the insects were still attracted to it. You know.
Yeah, here's a picture of it. They put this artificial mushroom on the tree, and the light from that attracted the insects. And so that was an experiment that was done that's kind of cool. And there's many facets to the living life, you know, that you have, here's all the different kinds of species that generate life. Like fireflies, goldfish, millipedes, bacteria, dinoflagellate plankton, jellyfish, comb jellies, krill, and of course the mushrooms. And then you have things like the glowworm, the firefly.
We have
these different.
There's a squid that has tentacles, and it actually was talking about how it'll take a tentacle and to attract the prey, but if it gets attacked, the tentacles can break off, and it leaves it off, and it squirts an ink jet and leaves it away. It's very ingenious, some of this stuff that goes on here. Doug, you know, if we would not believe, if we would not have know about all this stuff, it would be very difficult. Somebody tried to describe you an animal or a plant that glowed just under its own light, you know, when the dark comes in and it glowed, we wouldn't believe it. We would not believe
If
it.
you understand the chemistry behind it, you're talking about taking some of the molecules that are in life, like ATP and some
Right.
proteins and all these different things, and it codes for this light-giving enzyme.
Very interesting.
And it's really amazing. Here's a jellyfish, and this jellyfish is so prominent in this particular lake that lake all glows with this blue.
That whole lake is glowing right now. That is amazing. Where is that at, Doug? Do you know where it is?
Well,
I know. I always ask him these questions. We hadn't.
you dirty bird.
I know. I'm always doing this to him, but
Yeah,
but it's kind of fun. I'm not sure. I'd like to see a phenomenon like that. That'd be really cool. It's probably in Australia or something.
Okay, that was lighting up breakers off of New Jersey.
Oh, really?
And so it was in the ocean where that was occurring.
Okay. All right.
And so,
So you might not see it again.
and then we talked about symbiosis a couple of shows ago, and there's certain things that, parts of the light-giving things that help the animals hunt or see things.
Sure. Yeah.
Do things of that sort. And one is the one we've talked about for years, many years, the anglerfish. And that is another problem with this bioluminescent thing, is that you have it spread all over the entire world, even down deep in the depths.
Yeah, we were talking. Yeah, those fish that glow in the dark.
You have all these different species, and it seems like many of these species that are deep sea fish, that you catch one and bring it up, they sort of burst because of their
They're used to
bladders
yeah.
are adjusted for the deep
High
sea.
temperature or high compression. Yeah. Yeah.
But there they are down where it's really dark. They have their own internal light giving software that brings out that.
It's an amazing thing.
That type of stuff. I just and the anglerfish has this little dangly thing that glows in the dark.
Comes off the top of its head like it comes and it wiggles around. Yeah.
So it's sort of like a little bait that it has, and it attracts. It attracts other fish, and then of course when the fish get too close, that thing has a mean mouth on it.
Yeah, it looks like piranha. Looks kind of like a piranha mouth. Yeah.
It's a pretty wicked looking fish.
The other thing this article talked about, Doug, was interesting that, and it brings up the old saw that we use in that with Michael Behe brought up years ago, and that's the irreducible complexity. Right. It's again another one of these scenarios where unless everything works, nothing really works. And it's not only that, it's Dembski's argument, the specified complexity, which I don't think this article talked about. It's like they're trying to figure out why this why this thing would have evolved. In fact, the real tricky thing is that you need creatures to see. You need oxygen, because they all work out with oxygen. There's an oxygen but they don't always work the same way with oxygen, but they need it. That's what's very fascinating too. But how would these creatures have evolved in supposedly a reducing atmosphere where there was no oxygen? So they're saying, well, it came to pass before there was oxygen, before there was eyesight, and then it stuck around because the seeing creature. It's like they're giving all this conscious volition to things that have no ability to think that way, unless there's something outside this design. There is a consciousness, we believe, that's designing all this stuff, and we call them God.
They can't escape the concept of design, and they know that things are designed, but they don't want to acknowledge the designer, so they make this stuff up.
They make the stuff itself. We're a molecule, and I can decide I want to glow in the dark because for 100 million years later, there's going to be things that are going to see the green that I'm putting here. That when you make it, we're making it sound ludicrous, but the fact of the matter is, it is ludicrous when you really put it out there. But it's amazing how plausible they can make it sound. But when you strip it down to its bare essentials, the emperor has no clothes. It just doesn't. You can convince yourself all you want, but this scenario doesn't make any sense in any kind of a reasonable scenario we're reading some of the speculations, and they're not even they're not even plausible, Doug. That's what's so really ridiculous about it, you know? They basically come up with one theory, and then this thing really goes against it. So they got to figure out an ad hoc explanation for how to explain why that's coming around. But the problem is with deep time, Doug, it's even worse because you have to have these things around for hundreds of thousands, even millions of years before they're even useful for what they should be used for. So they got to postulate another use for it, you know?
Some of these creatures don't live very long, you know. It's just maybe a few days or weeks, and then they go into the different life cycle, you know. The Bermuda fireworm has its own flashy mating ritual. If the females rise from the sea bottom, they swim in the circle of light that attracts the males. The males, with a vision optimized for the female's wavelength, they enter the circle and respond with their own bursts of light, and they make a contribution to the reproductive process. You know.
Boy, that must be some...
The fertilization occurs in the water so that the species can continue.
Wow.
Now, have you ever, when growing up, went out and caught fireflies and put them in a jar?
Yeah, and it was really interesting. I never thought when I was a kid you could actually catch them, and they're actually pretty easy to catch. And it's interesting when you see, if you get them wrong and you get them on your hand, that luciferase or whatever that cool, the glow stuff, it gets on your hands, and your hands will glow, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of neat. And I remember the really memorable experience. We were out visiting some friends in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And we stopped at a place called Longfellow's Wayside Inn. And this is in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And what I remember most vividly about this place was after we got done with dinner, this is a spot that's really historic and beautiful. And there was a little tiny bridge that goes across a brook, and the whole place was just full of
fireflies. Yeah.
It's all lit up with this glow. It's sort of like when you go into the Pirates of the Caribbean.
So you're in Fantasia here, man. You're in a...
It's really just a memorable experience that we had when we were in Sudbury, Massachusetts. So here's another one.
I was going to say, look at.
Why don't you read that one?
This is a really fascinating thing. I'll read it. It says some marine animals use the light they generate to leave a decoy while they escape, and this was really cool. For instance, some species of segmented scale worms drop luminescent scales as countermeasures when attacked. The North Sea marine worm, Eucylus blomstrandi, hope I pronounced that right, but it has a flashing luminescent structures in each segment. When threatened, and this is kind of neat now when I was reading this, it was fascinating, it breaks itself in half, and it switches off the lights in the front portion, which later regenerates, and leaves the tail shining with continuous brightness to interest predators until its light dies away. Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. I mean, it shuts off the light on the front section, it cuts off the back section, and then it gets away. And then, of course, it has the ability to regenerate the whole missing half of its body, which, you know...
Why don't we give this project to the engineering department and see if they can come up with
Oh, boy, I know.
You know, I really have doing chemical engineering or even the mechanical engineering that would go into something like this, and something that's tiny and but that would be self-contained to do its own
I know.
chemistry.
The problem is, it's like the old joke where the guy said, I can do anything God wants to do, and the guy says, and I could create a man out of nothing, out of the dirt, and then and he starts to pick up a spoonful of dirt, and God says, get your own dirt. Yeah. You know, the fact is, everything comes from God. He made it all, including the dirt. But Doug, there's a deep dwelling squid. Remember we talked about the people way deep down, Octopothus, I think, Delectron. I don't usually have a problem reading these, but that was a little tricky. But it can wriggle its bioluminescent arm tips to lure prey, or detach those tips when we attack. That's what I was talking about earlier. Leaving them glowing and twitching as a squid escapes under cover of an inky cloud. It's just fascinating, Doug, to see all the different, you talk about the biodiversity, the stuff that's out there. You know, we have we've talked over the years, and it's not in this article, but I mentioned earlier in the show, but or earlier before the show, I was talking to Doug, a creature we've been very fascinated with over the years called the ropen, and there's some evidence that it may be a pteranodon or flying reptile type of creature. We don't know for sure. They've kind of narrowed down to where it could is, some island off the coast of Papua New Guinea. They're not telling you which one it is, but it may have a bioluminescent ability because it seems to glow in the dark based on eyewitness reports. Again, this right now is speculation, but would be fascinating, Doug, to see a reptile, because at this point in time, most of the stuff we see, it's either insects, plants, or deep water things. They're deep water animals. We don't really have a lot of what I would call, we don't really have mammalian or reptilian or even amphibian creatures on a macro biological sense, larger, more complicated life forms. We don't really seem to have any of the bioluminescence at this juncture that we have. But it would be really interesting to see, Doug, if that creature really does have bioluminescence, because again, we've talked about the creatures, the fiery flying serpents in Book of Isaiah. Remember, he talks about the fiery flying serpents, which may be the rhamphorhynchoid type creature. Again, may have been having a bioluminescent type of thing.
And then you have the fire breathing type of.
Well, that's a different thing entirely. But yeah, that's there. I use that as an example. I said, if we did not see or have not caught a snake-like creature that lives in the water that could cause a shock, or we not dug deep sea fishes that glow in the dark, or a bug whose butt lights up, if we didn't know all that, we would never believe it. And so a fire-breathing dragon, it sounds really mythological because we've never seen one. But we've talked about the chemicals in the bombardier beetle that mix inside and come out in a 212 or 275 degree heat. It actually makes a noise when it comes out. And that's a little bug, of course, not a reptile, but it's the idea that there are, what is that old Shakespearean line? There are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamed of in your philosophy, Horatio. I say this to the evolutionists. There's things you've never dreamed of and the Creator has made. Many of them have gone extinct, granted, but we're still discovering things over and over again. I mean, when you go down, those creatures live in the thermal vents, and they don't live with oxygen. They breathe with sulfur, or they live with. I mean, there's just things that. Doug, this planet has so many amazing, even today, after all the discoveries and all that, you think there's nothing left to discover, and there's always something new that comes up. But saying that, the stuff that we have discovered already is still pretty amazing. It's very amazing.
Speaking of the ropen,
yes,
I've talked with quite a number of people who said they have seen them. Like
wow.
Wetzel talks about it. And, apparently, there are actually a lot of different sightings of these creatures.
Right.
All over the world and all the United States. We're getting a lot of reports of all these creatures being seen in a number of different places. Of course, they're hard to photograph. And so I guess what we're going to need to do is actually come up with a carcass to actually. Well,
until you get some hard evidence where it's there, you have the creature right there. And over the years we've had creatures like some sea monster type things have floated up, but we haven't had anything really in recent years that we can really put it on. There's a lot higher degree of higher standards, I guess, of testability in some of this stuff, as it should be, I think. But still saying that, Doug, I think you got something else here, Doug?
Yeah, this is one. This is a freshwater limpet found in New Zealand.
What is a limpet?
It's a sort of like a squid type of creature.
I mean, I remember the incredible Mr. Limpet with Don Knotts back in the movie years ago, but it's not the same thing.
It gums up its attackers with sticky green goo, perhaps making the predator itself an object of interest to other predators. And it's warning to potential predators, 8 of the 12,000 species of millipedes, such as Matixia sequoia, glow as a warning to potential predators and increase their light intensity when disturbed. Though millipedes also produce poisonous hydrogen cyanide, millipedes that do not luminesce are attacked twice as often, suggesting that the glow deters predators with good memories.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's all these different creatures that are here.
Oh, look, that's a weird one.
Yeah, that's one of the millipedes.
Yeah, it glows in the dark. Yeah, and it's a lot of them. They glow green, but not all of it is green. There's some of them that, like that one you talked about, had a green and had a red and a yellow kind of a combination of colors. You know.
And speaking of glowing green, how about those MSU Spartans?
Oh yeah, well. Yeah, well, we better be good, Doug. We've got a couple of Michigan fans out there. We don't want our camera to get turned off, you know.
Here's the anglerfish, and you know, that's a really amazing creature. It has this little appendage at the end that it uses as a fishing bait.
I know. Yeah.
What was this one here? This one was it's a bobtail squid. And what does that guy do? Living light produced by by bacteria that's on this nocturnal bobtail squid.
So it's a different kind of it's not inherent.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
It uses it as a camouflage in the moonlight, just as bioluminescence enables other marine animals to hide by matching their light to the daytime.
Yeah, there was a fish that I saw there. His top side would glow a certain way, so he would be invisible to predators from the sky, maybe like birds. Yep.
Hatchet fish is something that does that.
Does that? Yeah. Okay.
It regulates the color and intensity of light from a species a specific pattern of photophores on the underside to mask the silhouette against the sky above, and so it renders them invisible from below.
Yep. And all of these things, Doug, so many of them, there's no common element as to how they would have evolved, Doug. You have to deal with that whole idea of convergent evolution, to me, which is always really, it's just basically throwing something at the wall and see if it's going to stick, because that makes no sense based on any kind of rational
And it says here,
reason.
bioluminescence remains a riddle for evolutionary scientists. Neither its biochemistry nor its biodiversity follows a discernible pattern.
Yeah, that's what we're saying, yeah.
But it has, this specific purpose designed by God in mind, done all these different ways.
I know.
And it's sort of like you have different computer programs being designed by the same designer for the same purpose, actually for a lot of different purposes, but for different creatures, and in different ways, but it's all coming about.
I mean, to me, Doug, the most amazing thing is, like, nobody questions the fact, we've talked about this many times. I mean, like, I work with Photoshop. No one would question, that's a very complicated art program. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that you look at that and go, oh, that was really designed with, it does a lot of things. But, Doug, as complicated as it is, there's nothing alive in it.
That's right, yeah.
We're talking about living systems here, Doug, that do all this stuff. And they want to say it happened by accident. I mean,
thousands and millions of different types of systems of this sort that were designed by God for a specific purpose and with incredible variety.
Yes.
Just to show off God's creativity and His beauty and purpose. And if you can't see this, I'm really questioning your intelligence in this matter, because you have to get past your own bias of not wanting to worship God.
Well, and your own rebellion of wanting to,
submit and worship to your Creator.
He's got a lot of things for you.
He really does. And we hope you enjoyed our show tonight on Revolution Against Evolution. We'll see you next time.